Welcome to the EPG webinar. This webinar will go through processing via Smartcard. To start off with, I'm just going to go through importing a file totally manually. So this doesn't use any workflow to guide you through the process. It's just purely a manual process, but it shows what goes off in the background. Once we've done that, we'll actually then look at a workflow and how that workflow can be used to process a file through EPG. So if we look on the submissions screen, we've got an import button. We click on import, and it gives us an option for the applications that me as a user have permissions to see. I'm actually logged in as a super user, so I can see all the relevant applications. I'm going to pick manual import, click next. It's defaulting to a location that we've set elsewhere in the configuration, but essentially it points me into a place where I can pick a file. We'll then click next. Again, it's defaulted to a file format, but at this stage, if I wished, I knew the file was in a different format, I could select a different format. But we click finish. That's now importing the file, and it's actually performing the validation as soon as the file has been imported. Okay, so at this stage, any warnings or any errors would appear in here. If we've got the correct permissions, we could edit the file at this place, but I'm just going to accept it. So we now have another file in here. This is the one that we've just imported. We can go in and we can look at that file. So we've got some summary details on here. We'll note that we've got 2 credit transactions for this amount. If we go in and browse the file, this shows us the actual detail on the file. We'll notice that a debit has appeared here, and this is because of the contra record that appears on all BACS files with a value. So we've got the 2 credit transactions, and then we've got the balancing debit transaction. The details on the file, we've got destination sort code, destination account, account type, very rarely used nowadays. This goes back many years to when some banks had 6 or 7 digit account numbers. Transaction code, originating sort code, originating account, so these are your organization's details. This is a text field that you can populate with anything you like. It's 4 characters in length. However, if your file is a salaries or an expenses file, then this is the real-time data code that your expenses or salaries system will generate, and eventually through the back system this gets sent off to the taxman to basically bring together what these people have been paid with what they're telling people they're being paid. The amount in pence, account name, so this is your account name. User reference, typically this would be some sort of supplier payment reference. However, if these transactions are direct debits, this must be the DDI reference. Destination account name, and you have the option of putting individual processing dates on the file. In this instance, we haven't got any, but on the file that imports into EPG, you can have a date on the end of each of the records. If there's no dates in here, then this date is taken as a processing date. However, if you do want to populate the processing date field, all the fields must be populated. You can't have some and some beyond this. It's either all or nothing. Within here, you've got a rudimentary search. So if you want to search for Smith or a value, then obviously this will give you the next value in the list. Any errors or warnings will appear in the bottom here. If you do get an error, you can click on that and it will actually highlight the appropriate line up in the top. Again, if we have got edit rights at this stage, you can edit the file. It's the same screen as the browse file, but obviously now you've got the option to go in and change fields. If you do change a field, so let's go ahead and do it. So we'll change that. Obviously these totals and the contra have now changed, so you must recalculate the totals and recalculate the contras. Click OK, and it won't let you go any further till you revalidate it. Any changes you make on the file, you must revalidate. And now we've got the accept button, so we can now accept that. In the manual run through, this button authorize doesn't really make any sense, but we'll come back to that when we go through some automation. But typically what we want to do at this stage is we want to sign the file. Now if I just come out and then just go back to my summary, because we're doing this manually, we don't have any tasks in here, so I have to do it through this screen here. Right. I have a card inserted in my card reader on my laptop, and I select sign. It gives me another view of the data. I can still go in and I can still browse that data if I so wish. I can view the raw submission, so that's the actual file format that will get sent to BACS. Surprisingly, not many people view that screen, but I'm actually going to sign it. So it's now asking for my PIN number that's associated with my card. And it's now using the credentials on the card to encrypt the file and encapsulate it. So there's no way now that that file has been signed that even if I've got permissions, I can edit it. So there's only two logical things to do with that file. If somebody comes running and says, no, don't send it, it's wrong, then you would have to delete it and basically start the process again. Or hopefully, in most cases, it's say, okay, yeah, we're now ready to transmit that file to BACS. So we hit the transmit button. The first thing that EPG does before it does the transmit is it reperforms a validation. And the reason for this is we could have actually imported the file 3 months ago. And the rules behind the validation may have changed in that time. Now, if you did get an error at this stage, that would prevent the file being sent to BACS. However, in the real world, what tends to happen is you import the file today, you send it to BACS today, or probably at the very worst case, you imported the file yesterday and want to send it today. So the validation rules generally wouldn't change in that period of time. So we click OK on that. We now have an option, because we're doing this manually, we get the option to select how we want to send the file. So there's 3 ways that you can send a file to BACS. There's a structural test, and what happens there is that you send the file into BACS. If the file looks okay, BACS basically send you back the submission summary report, and that's the end of the test. If you do a full test, that same process happens, but it goes a step further in that BACS will generate a test input report for you. So the test input report is what BACS would have actually processed, and obviously there's the option to send live. Now, even though I'm sending this into a test system, because I'm a bit paranoid about sending live files, I will still select structural test and hit the button there. Again, because I'm doing this manually, we get this verify service certificate come up, and this is basically BACS saying to you, this is who you're connecting through to. So I accept that. We now get the sign challenge, and we have to now input our smart card PIN again. And this is now actually logging on to BACS using my credentials, and it's going to physically send over the file to BACS. Once BACS have got the file, they immediately send back the details for a submission summary report, and this pops back, and basically this is confirmation of what BACS have received. This is not necessarily what they will process, although the vast majority of times it is. What BACS will process is made available on an input report within 4 hours. So the details on here, the transmission has been completed, and I've sent it as a structural test. There's the details of the credentials used to sign and to send the file, and then there's some summary details of what's actually been sent. Okay, T200 here looks a bit worrying, but T200 means it's worked, and you can again view the response here, and you can get back to see the submission summary report. That submission summary report is also held within EPG, so even though the file has now been transmitted, we can see that the file is there, it's showing as transmitted. We can still open that up, we can still browse it. We can't do any of these with it because that doesn't make sense, it's already been processed. You could export the file out, so an external copy of the file, but you can also go in here and you can get back to this screen and view. So if in a few hours time I think, well, actually did I send that as live or test, I can come back here and just double check. Okay, so that's purely doing a manual transmission. What we want to look at doing now is setting up a workflow to automate some of that, because it's a smart card processing. The very act of putting the smart card in, putting a PIN number in, means that some of the tasks are manual, but you can set up EPG to do directory monitoring or a calendar event to automatically import the file. So if we just have a quick look at the configuration here, what I've got set up for one of these applications, I've got a number of workflows set up, but we're actually going to look at this one. So what we're saying here is we've set up a supervisor role, so a supervisor role will get any alerts to do with the entire workflow. We're only setting display and email alerts for errors and warnings, so when a task is due, we're not going to generate an alert, but if it's late or there's a problem with it, then it will generate an alert. And this is what we're actually wanting to do with the file. So we want to import it, and we're going to automate that task. We're giving it 5 minutes to do what it needs to do, for larger files that might be extended to 15-20 minutes maybe, but 5 minutes is generally long enough. Then we're going to put the file down from manual authorize. So this is just going to push it out to a user or users of EPG. For this task you don't need a smart card. You can define a group of people and say, let's say there's 5 people assigned to do the authorize. Under this you only need one of them to do it, but if I change that to a 2, then you need 2 different people from that group of 5 to do an authorize. Authorize tends to be less important if you're using smart cards, because as I said, the very nature of a smart card, you must do a manual act. However, if you're automating the sign and transmit using a HSM, then the manual authorize becomes more important. You can also set limits, so you can get EPG to automatically authorize if these values are not breached. If either of these values is breached, then EPG can then push it out to be manual authorized. And then we want to sign the file. We can't automate it because it's a manual task with a smart card, but we can make it happen as soon as the previous task has been completed, or at least request that it can happen immediately. And then we want to transmit the file to BACS. Again, we can't automate it, and I'm sending it as a structural test. What I've also done is I've set up some directory monitoring rules. Again, the one I'm interested in is this one. So this rule is going to start this workflow. It's going to look in this directory for a file that matches this. You can use wildcards in this file name. I'm going to use this file format, and once it's imported, I'm going to move the original file to this location. If you don't want to keep a copy, you can delete the original. Now, directory monitoring is one way that you can actually start off the workflow. Another way would be to use a calendar event. So if you set up a calendar event, you give it a time, you give it some sort of sensible name. Again, you pick the application, and within there you pick the workflow you want to run. And essentially at 3 o'clock this afternoon, that would attempt to run that workflow. If the file was there, it would pick it up, do what it needed to do. If the file wasn't there, it would alert you to the fact that it wasn't there. And you can set this up also as a recurring task. So you could say, well, actually every Friday at 3 o'clock we want to run this workflow. However, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use the directory monitoring to get a file into EPG. So I've actually got a file already set up, ready and waiting to drop in to my folder structure. So this is the folder that I'm monitoring. None of these files match what I'm actually looking for, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a file, and I'm going to just drop it into here. So EPG is pulling that particular folder, and within a matter of seconds, EPG will recognize that that file is there. It will import it into EPG. It will perform the validation, and it will then push it on to the next stage, which in this instance is a manual authorize. Then it will push it on to the next stage, which is a manual sign, and then onto a manual transmission. Those last two are manual purely because it's a smart card. If we had a HSM sat on the network, we could automate those tasks. Now, as we can see, that file has disappeared from that folder, and if we go back to EPG, we can see that this file has now actually popped in. It's coming with a status of validated, which means it's come in and it's passed validation, and it's telling me now that the next step is an authorize. If I now look in my my tasks, then we have an authorize task, a sign, and a transmit. Now I can see all of these because I am a super user. If you were just to assign the sign role, then you'd only see the sign, and you'd only see those for the applications that are relevant to yourselves. So what we need to do is to now do the manual authorize. We can do that from one of three places. We can click on here and we can get to this screen. We could go and click on the file. We get to the same screen, and if we've got an alert to say, well, actually we should have done the authorize by now, then we could click on the alert. That would also take us back to that same screen. I'm going to do it from the file, and basically what we want to do, we want to authorize it. Now again, I can browse a file. Because I'm in the super user, I can edit. However, if as a user I do not have edit rights, then that would be grayed out. But within the edit, you can also define within EPG which specific fields a role can edit. So it may be that you may allow users to change the processing date, but you don't want anything else to change, and you can define that within EPG. But I'm going to authorize. So again, this is just a manual task, so you don't need a smart card to do this, and indeed you don't need to do this. Your workflow could just say import, sign, transmit. But I'm happy with that. That's okay. But now if we close that, we can now see that this is still validated, but the next task is sign. We now go and look at tasks. The authorized task has now disappeared because it's been completed. And just to show you that we can do it from here, I'm going to get to that screen, this time from the task screen. Again, we can still edit at this stage if we've got the permissions, but I'm going to sign. So again, my smart card is in the card reader. Signed. We can come out of there. That task is now come in. We can now, because it's signed, we can't edit or do anything else with the file. So again, we can transmit that. Again, this time it's defaulted to structural test because that's been defined within the workflow. However, because this is a manual option, we do get the option to change if we need to. Again, back saying hello. Sign the challenge, popping our pin again. Logging through to Bax, sending the file, and popping back the submission summary report. Okay. So that concludes the webinar for processing via Smartcard. There is another webinar which goes through a similar process but using HSMs. But thanks for listening. I hope you found it useful. Thank you.